Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. As a walk through the front lines for the 1st of December 2022. I'm still very much under the weather, so do bear with me. Hope my voice carries through okay. What's the overnight news? Well, no news of anywhere particularly being hit overnight. Kherson, I think, has been shelled, but no cruise missile attacks as far as I'm aware, and drone attacks and what have you. Same with Russia, as Ukraine have been hitting into Russia over the last sort of couple of days, but nothing last night. The Ukrainian figures for the Russian losses are as follows: 560 men liquidated. So that's again sort of creeping back up consistently to what the numbers have been previously. One tank, 5 APCs, 2 artillery systems, 12 other vehicles and fuel tanks. So that's an interesting uptick there, if not particularly anywhere else. No drones lost, so that's a point of interest. The UK intelligence update is quite interesting in its last point. So what it effectively says that the Russian attacks, these long-range attacks on the state's critical national infrastructure, so rather than its military forces, the energy infrastructure, to demoralize the population and ultimately force the state's leaders to capitulate, it has been less effective than what it would have been had they done it right at the beginning of the war. So this is to say that actually Russia have missed a trick here. If they had been hitting the energy infrastructure right from the beginning, and Ukraine had 9 months of very poor energy and water supplies, actually, you might have seen some capitulation of the Ukrainian population. So that's interesting. Its last point there. So Ukraine, also with Ukraine having successfully mobilized for 9 months, material and psychological effect of these long range attacks is likely less than if it was deployed in the initial part of the war. Ukraine has hit a few places. So command says it's hit. So Ukraine command says it's hit 2 of Russia's warehouses and 3 military bases in the last 3 days. So it's not necessarily last night, but news coming through of hits all over the shop. A few of these down in the sort of Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast, and a few elsewhere. We'll come on to a couple of these. There has been a railway station hit. So I've marked this on my map. So the railway station substation was hit right into the. I think that's still in the Luhansk Oblast. As you can see, I think the border is there. The distance is about. I mean, it's well within HIMARS range. So that's what 76 kilometers. HIMARS 84 kilometers. So you can have HIMARS right back here, and that's hitting that successfully. So you can guess it's something like that, some kind of GMLRS system. Yeah, so that was hit. We have had news of lots of, or evidence, I should say, rather news of lots of defenses being built up and down occupied Ukraine, and we already know, of course, that there's the Wagner line that sort of goes up around here, up in front of Rubizhny, Severodonetsk, and Lysychansk, and then right back along this river and along the annex border to the Russian border on the east here, past the city of Luhansk. Well, there are now defenses being built literally from right up here, down this sort of Svatove line to Kreminna, and then behind Bakhmut. And it appears all over the shop, right down, and certainly around the Kherson region and northern Crimea, and possibly, everywhere that they possibly can. This is quite a good move from the Russians. So not only are they fighting these meat grinder battles on the front lines that you could cast doubt over their efficacy, but while they're doing that, they're busily building fortifications behind. Now you can kind of slag off those fortifications as not being the best, or being only as good as their weakest points, but they will slow and it will cause Ukraine problem if Ukraine go on an offensive, which eventually you assume they must do if they're going to win this war. This gives you the defensive mindset of the Russians in terms of holding on to the territory they have presently. Okay, So actually, I've gone into this is an older war map and map because it's still got Kherson. There is a comparison map actually. So let's go to the more recent one, which is this one. So sorry about that. Yeah, so I see Russia as really wanting to hold on to the territory they presently have. At the very least, maybe losing some of this Kherson Oblast back to Crimea, which is why they're building defenses in Crimea. And who knows what they're going to plan with this particular area. But certainly Donetsk, Luhansk, and even into the northern Luhansk area, they're building defenses right up to the northern border. So I think that gives you some indication of what's going on there. Okay, let's go to the front line. It's been, so where should we start? Let's go to my map. It's been much of a muchness in the Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna front line. There have been repelled attacks around Kuzmivka, Makivka again. Not much news from north, really, around Pershi-Travnevi and Vilshana, even down to Kizlivka. But certainly a lot of activity from Kuzmivka and Makivka area. And most of the news seems to be coming out of, as we come further down south, this P66 highway and the Krasna River, and these settlements that sort of join or links Svatova to Kreminna down south. It's around the Ploshchanka Chervonopopivka area. Now you're starting to hear Holukove and Zitlivka being mentioned. So the Ukrainians are pushing on towards these two settlements, or at least shelling them or repelled attacks. And this is the first time that these have been mentioned for some time. So it does indicate that the Ukrainians could be moving further to the east. You've got various sort of rumors coming out of Kreminna and various claims coming from Russian sources around the Kreminna area, and it's worth sort of reading that. So I'm going to go to the Institute for the Study of War. The reason I like the Institute for the Study of War is that they do really survey the cross-section of Russian sources and military bloggers to get a sense of what are being claimed, and they often, aren't mutually compatible. But and you'll see an element of this in a second. So the Ukrainian General Staff noted that troops shelled Chervonopopivka and Ploshchanka, indicating the Ukrainian troops have actually advanced into these settlements. And I'm going to say as well, I'm going to add to this that, NOAA reports says, unconfirmed reports that the Ukrainians have approached Holukove and is very close to the town. Fighting is ongoing on the P66 highway between Ploshchanka and Chervonopopivka. Chervonopopivka is considered a grey zone with no or very minimal presence. A Russian presence, sorry. So that's to add to what I'm going to say with the ISW, because they don't mention too much about the here, but it seems that the Ukrainians are really close to the P66 and causing the Russians a bit of a headache around there. Conflicting report. Oh, sorry. Russian troops additionally attacked Ukrainian positions south of Kreminna near Bilohorivka, and we'll come on to that in a second. And Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces shelled Lysychansk. So that's the first time I've heard of this happening. So Lysychansk is down here, this city here. And if they're being shelled, then Ukrainians are concentrating on areas further behind, say, Bilohorivka and Zolotorivka. So that's interesting that they're trying to shell here. What they're trying to shell, maybe they're shelling artillery positions, maybe they're shelling tactical command and control positions. Who knows? But it's interesting that their sort of vision goes past the immediate front line in that area. Okay, let's continue with the ISW. So conflicting reports emerged on the general pace of the Ukrainian counteroffensive along the Svatove-Kreminna line on November the 30th. So multiple Russian sources claim that Ukrainian counteroffensive operations stalled in the area due to a shortage of artillery ammunition and an inability to procure supplies due to poor weather conditions and energy disruptions. That's an interesting claim. So the mud and energy disruptions have meant that the Ukrainians are failing to get supplies to their front line up and down here. Ammunition is in short supply. There's talk about Ukraine's kicking up their own production and NATO trying to get production to happen in Eastern Europe for the old Soviet-style era weapons, but also a lack of supply possibly for the NATO ammunition. Russian A Russian source stated that, on the contrary, so this is where we get the conflicting reports from the Russian sources, the situation around Kreminna is growing increasingly tense, and claimed that Ukrainian forces are amassing north of Kreminna near Chervona-Popivka. Does seem like there is heightened activity around there, and you're starting to get the feeling that they are moving, if very slowly, to the east around there. Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov claimed that Chechen Akhmat Spetsnaz forces, so they're kind of special forces of the Chechen units, and the LNR, Second Army Corps troops, are making excellent progress in the area. So you've got all these different claims that Ukrainians are stalled because of supply issues. Ukrainians are making progress around Chervona-Popivka, or they're amassing troops, and it's looking increasingly problematic for the Russians. And the Chechens and the LNR saying, "Hey, we're making really good progress in the area." Make of that what you will. Other sources seem to indicate that the Ukrainians are pushing in this area, so they're putting pressure uh, along the P66 to the north of Kreminna, whilst also pressing, by looks of this, into the forest to the south of Kreminna, whilst the Russians are pushing towards Bilohorivka. And NORA report says Igor Gherkin, alias Strelkov, so the Russian military blogger that used to play a big part in the Donbass war from 2014 onwards, has finally shown up. So he was sent to the front line, is apparently on the front line, but is actually recorded still in Russia. Anyway, he's reportedly in the Svatove area now, soon a one-way ticket to The Hague. Anyway, artillery duels ongoing south of Svatove near Popivka, and fighting near Kuzmivka decreased. So that's interesting. Ukrainian waits for favorable conditions. And then south of there, so towards Kreminna, we've got Russian sources report that Ukrainians have now been spotted 5 to 6 kilometers west of Zitlivka. Unconfirmed reports that the Ukrainians have approached Hulikove and is very close to the town, fighting around a P66 ongoing, not captured yet. Fighting south of Kreminna continues. So 5 to 6 kilometers west of Zitlivka. Let's have a look at that. So here we have Zitlivka. Let's go for 5 kilometers to the west. So there you go. So possibly, somewhere around this area, we're starting to see Ukrainian forces. So I've had them broadly around here anyway for about a week now. I haven't changed my lines at all. There are just sort of conflicting reports coming out. But suffice to say that Ploshchanka, Chervona-Popivka, and all the areas around here look increasingly like they're under pressure from the Ukrainians. Okay, there was reports yesterday. Reporting from Ukraine did an interesting video saying that there are reports that the Russians had actually sort of burst through up towards here, um, and there are elements of truth to that, quite possibly, that they have been attacking up here, whilst there are still front lines going on to the east in Bilohorivka. That actually it might be easy for the Russians to get by it quite secretively through back to here. So it'll be interesting to see if anything else comes out about that. I haven't seen too much else concerning that. Bilohorivka is difficult. The Russians apparently are putting quite a bit of pressure on there. Spirne, there's still claims about Spirne and about whether Russians are controlling any of Spirne. There were claims that they controlled all of it, and that seems to have been pretty much BS. But we shall continue to I'll keep an eye on that. Bilohorivka as well. This more suddenly, Bilohorivka. The Russians are in the southern parts of the settlement there, by all accounts. So yeah, really tough fighting all along here. It's also worth noting that there is a Russian source claiming that Bilohorivka has been taken by the Russians entirely. Not sure that's true, but we shall see. One of the things, so I mentioned defences being built already. There's evidence that there's an awful lot of defences. There are an awful lot of defences being built around this whole sort of Bakhmut area, particularly sort of northeast of Bakhmut, right down sort of here. There's a place called Vrubivka where this has been geolocated. let's give you some indication of the extent of these fortifications that are being built. So big trenches, a lot of dragon's teeth, all the usual stuff we've already seen, just in a very coordinated. They are putting, these aren't just guys with shovels digging small foxholes and trenches. These are, properly constructed trench networks that are, fairly substantial pieces of construction work. This is taking place. I mean, these are the ones that have been geolocated, as I say, to Vrubivka, 2 kilometers north of there. And in fact, DefMon has mapped a lot of these out, and you can see how extensive they are. Not only are there a few, of the smaller ones, as in different lines of defenses, but there are some sort of major ones going north to south behind the front lines. So if we have a look at how far behind the front lines that they are, so let's say Spearner's front line there, that looks to be 8 kilometers behind the front line. So 8 to 10, 12 kilometers behind the front line, they are building these extensive fortifications. Right, let's get on to the claims around what's going on around Bakhmut. Claims of repelled attacks in Yakovlivka and Bakhmutsky. Again, nothing unusual there. Now, I've talked about this petrol station here, this gas station on this elevated piece of ground in the to the northeast of Bakhmut. I've now seen something like 4 separate pieces of footage of this being taken out at night. This that petrol station simply is no more. Where there have been Russian thermal drone imagery of Russian troops amassing here, and then really, really accurate artillery hitting it again and again, and taking out these people. It's quite incredible footage. Obviously, I can't show it here, but it's quite incredible in terms of the accuracy of the artillery. And so Russians, yes, they control that, but they're having a hard time, and they've lost probably a number of troops in that area. Troops around here there are a lot of convict troops, as according to the ISW. So Russian and Ukrainian sources indicated that Wagner Group fighters, largely including mobilized prisoners and elements of the both First and Second Army Corps, troops of the DNR and LNR respectively, are responsible for operations in the Bakhmut area. So there are a lot of these conscripts being fed into this meat grinder. And what has happened is there are supposedly movements in the southern outskirts of Bakhmut from Russian forces, so they may be making incremental gains down here. But at the same time, there are claims that the Ukrainians have done a sort of bit of a counterattack in Opitny and may have taken back an area of ground there, and that could be quite significant. So what's going on here is Klishchivka is now your big area of Ukrainian defense. The Russians are going to be trying to hit Klishchivka, and they'll be able to do that from several directions because now they have Ozaranivka, and it looks like they've got Kurdyumivka. They can attack it from at least 2 directions. Now, with Opitny, they can attack it from 3 directions. So if the Ukrainians are able to, give the Russians a bit of a bloody nose around Opitny and force them back there, then it means that they'll be unable to attack from 3 directions towards Klishchivka. And that obviously helps out the Ukrainians quite a bit, because if Klishchivka falls, right, so the front line then goes up along here, along the canal, and maybe along here, and they do manage to take those trench lines, then actually Bakhmut is looking more and more vulnerable. But worse than that, actually, it's the ability to have fire control over this road. So the supplies going into Bakhmut are apparently being somewhat compromised at the moment, because exactly like I said yesterday, you've got fire control. The Russians might possibly have fire control over these roads, from artillery and what have you back here. And if they move on Klishchivka, they'll have fire control possibly over this road, which leaves really only smaller roads into the back of Bakhmut. Now, there are heavy reinforcements being piled into Bakhmut, which should tell you that the Ukrainians are under a lot of pressure there. They wouldn't be applying reinforcements into this area if everything was going well. So things are a real challenge for the Ukrainians, and it really is going to be all about Klishchivka. What uh, what is worth noting is that Mayorsk is only just to the south here. This was this railway station I've been talking a lot about recently, and this was taken, incrementally over the last few weeks. But actually, that's only just south of Bakhmut. So we move on to Ozarenivka. I've now moved the front line of the Russians' front line further to the west to take this whole railway from Mayorsk up to Kodimivka, and you're starting to see that the Russians are making incremental gains towards Toretsk. So Klishchivka will be super important if they want to move on to Bakhmut, but they don't have to do that because it could be a change of tactics, and they could just start trying to surround Tourette's. The problem is New York has been an area that the Russians have been trying to get for a long time, and they've made very little gain around there. So trying to encircle Tourette's will require New York falling. So it could be something of a problem there. But really, it's all about looking out for Klishchivka. As I say, there are heavy defensive trench networks behind Klishchivka, and it is on elevated ground as well. So that's worth knowing. One excerpt from the ISW report that is worth talking about, or at least reading to you, is this Bakhmut analysis that they give right at the beginning of the report. So I'm just going to read it to you because I think it is worth discussing. Russian efforts around Bakhmut indicate that the Russian forces have fundamentally failed to learn from previous high casualty campaigns concentrated on objectives of limited operational or strategic significance. Russian forces have continually expended combat strength on small settlements around Bakhmut since the end of May. In the following 6 months, they have only secured gains on the order of a few kilometers at a time. As ISW has previously observed, Russian efforts to advance on Bakhmut have resulted in the continued attrition of Russian manpower and equipment, pinning troops on relatively insignificant settlements for weeks and months at a time. This pattern of operations closely resembles a previous Russian effort to take Severodonetsk and Lysychansk earlier in the war. As ISW assessed throughout June and July of this year, Ukrainian forces essentially allowed Russian troops to concentrate efforts on Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, two cities near the Luhansk Oblast border, of limited operational and strategic significance, in order to capitalize on a continued degradation of Russian manpower and equipment over the course of months of grinding combat. Okay, pause. So what this is saying is that Ukraine are fixing Russian forces. They did this at Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and there was some argument to say they should have done a quicker operational withdrawal, but some people claim that Zelensky was keeping on in Severodonetsk for political reasons. It didn't want it to fall so quickly, and this was kind of a win if they could keep there as long as possible. But actually, operationally, strategically, tactically, actually, it wasn't the best decision. However, they fixed the Russians in there for quite a long time, and they attrited a bunch of Russian forces for really limited gains, right? So some people say that Bakhmut has some kind of importance tactically for the area. It does have limited importance. Like there is some strategic gain for the Russians if they take Bakhmut. You can see that there are lines of logistic ground lines of communication, G-locks around here. However, they kind of lead to Bakhmut and not really through Bakhmut to other places because these roads are already taken. Yes, Seversk is your major problem because it then allows a greater encirclement of Seversk. It depends whether there are other, whether the Ukrainians can keep the Russians here. But Bakhmut in and of itself, doesn't have that great importance in the whole scheme of things for this whole area. It's not like as if, say, Druzhkivka was taken, and that kind of cuts between Kramatorsk and the towns like Toretsk and Kostyantynivka to the south. This is kind of stuck out on its own now. But what it's doing is it's grinding up the Russian forces here and is holding them in that place so that they can't be utilized elsewhere. And that's the important thing. Those forces are sucked in there. Now, these are Wagner forces and not the Russian military themselves. So I don't know whether that's an important note to make um, in that context. So back to where I was. Russian troops eventually captured Lysychansk and Severodonetsk and reached the Luhansk Oblast border, but the tactical success translated to negligible operational benefit as the Russian offensive in the east then culminated. Russian efforts in this area have remained largely stalled along the lines they reached in early July. Even if Russian troops continue to advance toward and within Bakhmut, and even if they force a controlled Ukrainian withdrawal from the city, as was the case in Lysychansk, Bakhmut itself offers them little operational benefit. The costs associated with 6 months of brutal grinding and attrition-based combat around Bakhmut far outweigh any operational advantage that the Russians can obtain from taking Bakhmut. Russian offensives around Bakhmut, on the other hand, are consuming a significant proportion of Russia's available combat power, potentially facilitating continued Ukrainian counteroffensive elsewhere. In other words, a cost-benefit analysis is broadly that it ain't worth it. Look, the TLDR of that is it's not worth it, Russia. You're whacking in a whole load of resources that could be better utilized elsewhere along the front for minimal gains. And therefore, the advantage really is in Ukrainian hands, even though it's horrible there and the Ukrainians are losing a lot of forces themselves. On balance, at least according to the ISW, it is hurting the Russians more than it is the Ukrainians. So as we zoom out of Bakhmut and move down south towards Avdivka, we have much of the same. Repelled attacks all around here, possibly from both sides, but certainly the Russians pushing on and Ukrainians defending. Pervomaisky, Novelsky down there as well, being sites of quite a bit of fighting, but no map changes. And then we move down to Marinka, and things are not looking great for the Ukrainians here. Incremental gains by the Russians. There's some geolocated footage of artillery strikes, Russian artillery strikes on Ukrainians. And yeah, not great in Marinka, but tough fighting, and it will be attritional, no doubt, for both sides. And then as we come down past Novomerkalivka towards Vuhledar and Pavlivka, there are claims that around Vuhledar, again, Ukrainians have been pushing back, but have been repelled by the Russians. At least that's what Russian mill bloggers are saying. The Russian MOD claimed that the Ukrainian troops continued unsuccessful attempts to regain lost positions southwest of Donetsk near Vuhledar, and Russian troops continued routine fire along the line of contact around Donetsk and in western Donetsk and eastern Zaporizhia Oblast. In other words, more of the same around there. Now, this is very interesting and quite cryptic. This is NOAA reports. Russians are reportedly preparing another attack on Pavlivka. Okay, that's unsurprising given their previous. In Marinka, fighting has reached the city center. Russia controls the eastern and southern parts of the city outskirts, and the Ukrainians are in full defense. Yep, okay. Something is brewing west of Pavlivka. What does that mean? Smiley face with shades. Something cryptic. And we know there's been some fighting going on around Vromivka, which is to the west of Pavlivka, and here it is, Vuhledar. But there's also been these claims about amassed Ukrainian troops and whether there'll be a push down south to Melitopol or Mariupol or Berdyansk. Who knows? Could that be a sign of what's to come? I don't know. Anyway, moving on to Kherson. Kherson City has been under a lot of pressure from Russian artillery. Ukrainian artillery is trying to hit back. Places like Holopristan and Oleshki have been particularly hit. In fact, the material has been pulled out of Oleshki and is now trying to be hidden by the Russians in the forested area around this highway between Holopristan and Oleshki. But other than that, really not much news to come out of there. No map changes, operational silence around Kimber and Spit. And the Ukrainians have hit Skadovsk again. This looks like a new Chernobivka. Skadovsk is this area, and it's just been hit. Virtually every night there's news that something's been hit in Skadovsk. So I don't know how much material the Russians have lost there, but it must be quite a bit. Anyway, that's the Frontline update. Hopefully that was of some use for you. Please like, subscribe, share. Thanks for your time. And any ways that you can support my channel, hugely appreciated. All that buy me a coffee, PayPal, YouTube thanks, all that kind of stuff. Really, really thankful. Or you can buy some of my books. Details are down below. Anyway, Toodle Pips, and I will see you for the extra video later.